In addition to creating lower thirds in Premiere, you can also use Photoshop to create unique lower thirds with textures and logos. Let's see how we can do that. So we're back to our Premiere project, and the first thing I'm going to do is export a still frame that I can kind of use as a reference for my lower thirds. I'm going to export this frame, and we can just name this frame reference. We don't need to import this into the project, but note that you can do that if you want to. And I'm just going to save it on my desktop for this example and hit OK. Now I'm actually ready to leave Premiere and hop over to Photoshop to begin work. In Photoshop, I'm going to create a new document that is appropriate to my sequence settings in Premiere. So I'm going to go to File, New. My preset is Film and Video, and I used a 1080p HD setting. So just note you have this drop down that you can pick depending on your sequence settings. Select that, hit OK, and notice that Photoshop provides us with guides to help us design our lower thirds. Again, this outside is our action safe, the inside is our title safe. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Let's go ahead and place our reference image. Once we've brought it in, we'll just hit this check mark, or you can hit return. So we can place that image into our document. I've moved my layers panel over here to kind of give us a up-close look at where we're going with this. So kind of keep an eye on that as we navigate. Now there's two ways you can get started with your lower thirds. One is to use your rectangle marquee and do some fill. My preferred method is to use my shape tools. Shape tools are down toward the lower end. I'm going to start by choosing the rounded rectangle. Notice up here your control bar has changed, so you have some things to work with up here. First of all, you want to make sure that you are drawing a shape, not path, not pixels. And we can set our fill color here. And I'm going to use this salmon color. I actually color picked that from her shirt earlier. No stroke, although you can drop down and select a stroke if you want. I do have the option with my fill to do a gradient. I'm going to work with some gradients later, but just not now. So now we are ready to begin drawing our shape. And I'm actually going to draw outside to kind of begin. And so that is my first shape that I'm going to work with. Now one of the cool things about working with Photoshop is you can place some textures in there. So I'm going to do that now. Go up to File, Place, and students at the J School are going to recognize this. I just went around and kind of found some interesting textures. You can bring anything you want for a texture in Photoshop for your lower thirds and work with that. So obviously this isn't going to work now. What I'm going to do is clip this texture to this shape. To do that, I'm going to go to the Layers panel. I'm going to right click and create clipping mask. And you can see it's now clipped inside that frame. Now if you do that and it doesn't work, it is probably because your file is not above your shape layer. So that's the first place you should check. Now I'm going to Command T, which is a keyboard shortcut for transform, and I'm just going to transform this to kind of fit in this shape. And hit return. Now, anything that I can do in my layers panel with the normal layer, I can do at this point in time. So if I want to go in and play with some of my layer modes, I can see what those would look like. I kind of like that darken, so we'll leave that. Now I'm going to group these two together. So I'm just shift selecting, and down here I'm going to click this group, and that is my group. If I want to name that, I can. Now I mentioned using gradient, so I'm actually going to apply the gradient to this entire group. I'm going to begin by masking it. So I'll select Add a Layer Mask, and the layer mask is actually where I'm going to apply my gradient. Back over to my toolbar, I'm going to grab my gradient tool, and you're just going to want to make sure that you are on a linear, not a radial gradient. Your mode is normal, your opacity is 100%. And we're going to draw our first gradient, see what it looks like. So you can see, you can just redraw it to your leisure till you find something you like. And I'm actually going to switch my foreground and background. So I'm drawing with my black as my background. And I kind of like that, just having it that lower effect and kind of having it blur out as we get closer up top. Okay, I like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and add another shape layer. Back to my shape. Want to make sure I've set my fill. And we're going to do another shape. Now, if I don't want to add a texture to this, I don't have to. I can still apply a simple gradient to just a shape layer. And I do that using the same method I use down here. Add the layer mask, grab your gradient tool, and I'm going to draw my gradient there. So it kind of fades off on the right edge. And again, you can just continue to redraw your gradient until you get a look that you like. One thing I want to make note of right here, and I'm going to demonstrate it, but I'm actually not going to use it for this project. You can bring in logos and place them just as you would that Photoshop texture. But of course, most logos are designed in Illustrator, as they should be, because that allows us to scale them without any impact on quality. So I'm going to show you how you can quickly place a logo. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and place that logo. File and place. And I just have an example I've saved to my desktop for us to use. So I'm going to grab that, hit place. And it's going to ask me where I want to crop to. You want to choose the bounding box for this. Hit OK. And as you can see, despite the fact this logo was designed on a white background, it brings it in as a transparency. And because it's an Illustrator document, we have no issues with resolution. We can scale that down, scale it up, and when we place it, we have a perfect logo. So if you have any type of logo that you need to embed, I encourage you to design that in Illustrator and place it into your lower thirds. For this project, we're actually not going to use that logo, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that now. Alright. At this point, we're ready to save out basically this bar. And we're going to use this bar as a template to design multiple lower thirds. So we're going to hide those layers, and we're going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as lower thirds. And you'd want to, add some title So this is your sidewalk sail, lower thirds, and save that and hit OK. So I'm actually going to save this as our first one, and I'm just going to put the name Aaron in front of this. So it's important to note our original lower thirds is still out there, and I'm going to create a new layer, and on that layer I'm going to add some type. Again, staying in my safe title area, drawing my text box. So this is Erin Adams, and she is the social media coordinator. That's our first person. And so let's talk a little bit about your font choice. I'm going to bring up my character panel so we can look at that and work with that for a bit. You want to choose a font that is sans serif, so without the feet. Think Futura, Arial, Helvetica. Those are all examples. If your organization has a certain style, you'll want to follow along with that. It's also a good idea to just create some difference between your title and your name. And we're going to change our color. One thing to look at in fonts is the leading or the space between lines. So if you auto, you can often end up with almost too much room. So it's worth it to play around with this so that you get a good look for the space between your name and your title. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and add a drop shadow to that. That's just going to give it a little presence on the screen. Go back to my layers panel, FX, and we're going to add a drop shadow. Hit OK. At this point, Aaron's lower thirds is ready to be processed out. So I'm going to go to my Actions panel. If your Actions panel is not visible, go to Window and Actions and open it. And you're looking for video actions. And again, if your video actions aren't listed, go over here to the drop down and you'll see video actions. And you're going to choose this first option. It's going to create an alpha channel, allowing us to use this in Premiere. And it's important to make sure that your frame reference and your background are turned off, because any of those that are turned off will not go into that alpha channel. And we're going to hit play. It's going to give you this message reminding you to disable that layer visibility. Hit continue, and it's ready to save out again. So we've already saved it as her name, so we'll just hit save, and we're going to close that. If I have another one to do, I can reopen my lower thirds, use that same process to create a second lower thirds. So again, I'll start by saving it, and this time it's going to be for Victoria. Again, run my alpha channel. Alright, since we have both of our lower thirds designed, let's go ahead and move over to Premiere and place those. So I'm going to go in and import both of my lower thirds. And just drag those up to my V2. So you can see I have two identical lower thirds created in Photoshop and easily placed in Premiere.